My daughter accidentally forwarded me a voice memo of my son-in-law calling me a worthless burden that smells like medicine while I was paying their rent and credit card bills. I stayed quiet until the next payment was due. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I was sitting at my kitchen table sorting through the monthly bills I would be paying for Savannah and Stephen again. At 62, this routine had become as automatic as taking my morning medications. The stack included their rent notice for $1,400, their credit card statement showing a minimum payment of $600, and their car insurance bill for $230. All told, I would be transferring over $2,000 from my modest retirement account to keep my daughter and son-in-law afloat for another month. My phone buzzed against the wooden table surface. Savannah's name appeared on the screen with a voice message notification. I figured it was another request for grocery money or perhaps news about Stephen's latest job interview. These messages had become frequent over the past 2 years, always delivered with that sweet, slightly apologetic tone that made me feel needed and appreciated as a father. I put on my reading glasses and fumbled with the phone screen. Technology still feels foreign in my hands, even after all this time. I accidentally hit the speaker button while trying to play the message, and Stephen's voice suddenly filled my quiet apartment. What I heard next made my entire world collapse in the span of 30 seconds. I swear to God, Savannah, your dad is becoming such a worthless burden that smells like medicine. The man shuffles around our place like he's already half dead, with that stupid pill organizer rattling in his pocket. And he expects us to act grateful while he throws money at us like we're some charity case. I can barely stand being in the same room as him anymore. My hands went numb. The phone felt like it weighed 50 pounds as Savannah's voice joined the conversation. I know, honey, I know. But we need his money right now. The rent is due tomorrow and our credit card is completely maxed out again. Just smile and nod when he comes by this week. We can figure out how to deal with this whole situation later when we're more financially stable. Later? Savannah, the man is 62, not 92. This could drag on for years and years. Every single time he walks through our door with those compression socks and his endless stories about doctor appointments, I want to lock myself in the bathroom. And the way he looks at us afterward, like we owe him some kind of emotional debt just because he helps with the bills. Stephen, please keep your voice down. The neighbors might hear you. I don't care who hears me. I'm tired of pretending to like someone who smells like a walking pharmacy and acts like paying our bills makes him part of our marriage. When was the last time we had a conversation with him that wasn't about his latest blood test results or some boring story from his accounting days? The message cut off abruptly, leaving me staring at the phone screen in complete silence. I could hear my neighbor's television playing through the thin apartment walls, the sound of traffic outside my window, the humming of my refrigerator in the corner. Normal sounds of a normal evening that no longer felt normal at all. I looked down at the bills spread across my table. The same bills I had been paying faithfully for 24 months, believing I was helping my daughter through a difficult period in her marriage. The same bills that apparently made me a worthless burden who smells like medicine. The cruel irony hit me like a physical blow. There I sat, surrounded by their financial obligations, preparing to transfer another chunk of my limited retirement savings to people who saw me as nothing more than an annoyance with a checkbook. People who talked about me like I was a diseased animal they had to tolerate in exchange for financial support. I thought about my late wife, Margaret, and how she used to worry about Savannah's ability to manage money and choose reliable partners. Margaret had never warmed up to Stephen during their brief courtship, saying something felt off about a man who never seemed to have steady employment but always had expensive taste in electronics and restaurants. I had dismissed her concerns as mother-in-law jealousy, encouraging her to give Stephen a chance to prove himself. Now I realized Margaret had been right about everything. She had seen through Stephen's charm and Savannah's assurances that he just needed time to find the right career path. But Margaret died 3 years ago, before she could witness how thoroughly her daughter had inherited Stephen's sense of entitlement and disregard for basic human decency. I felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. Not heartbreak exactly, but something deeper and more permanent. The death of an illusion I had been carefully maintaining for 2 years. The illusion that I was a beloved father helping his struggling child. The illusion that my financial support came with genuine gratitude and affection. The illusion that I mattered to them as anything more than a source of income. For 2 years I had been telling myself that Savannah was just going through a rough patch, that Stephen's work situation would eventually stabilize, that their occasional impatience with my company was just stress from their financial struggles. I had convinced myself that my monthly contributions were investments in our family relationship, proof that I was a good father who put his daughter's needs before his own comfort. Instead, I had been buying tolerance, purchasing brief visits and forced smiles from people who counted the minutes until I left their presence. Paying rent for the privilege of being mocked behind my back by the 2 people I loved most in the world. The voice message had been meant for someone else. Probably one of Stephen's friends or co-workers who shared his contempt for inconvenient family members. But technology had betrayed them, sending their private cruelty directly to its target. And now I knew exactly what they thought of the man who had been keeping them housed and fed for the past 2 years. I was a worthless burden who smelled like medicine, a walking pharmacy with compression socks and boring stories. A diseased annoyance they had to endure in exchange for financial security. But they had made one crucial miscalculation about this worthless old burden. They assumed I would remain blind and grateful forever, never questioning their motives or recognizing their manipulation. They thought I was too old, too lonely, too desperate for family connection to ever stop writing checks. They were about to learn just how wrong they had been. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Stephen's voice describing me as a worthless burden, followed by Savannah's casual agreement with his assessment. I kept replaying the conversation, searching for any hint of affection or defense from my daughter, but finding none. By 6 in the morning, I felt like I had aged 10 years in the span of 8 hours. I made my coffee with shaking hands, the same routine I had followed for decades, but everything felt different now. The apartment that had seemed cozy before now felt like a pathetic reflection of my reduced circumstances. The pill organizer that Stephen had mocked sat on my counter, a daily reminder of my mortality and their disdain. Even my reflection in the bathroom mirror looked older and more defeated than it had 24 hours earlier. As the morning progressed, memories began surfacing like poison bubbling up from a contaminated well. Moments I had deliberately misinterpreted or ignored because the truth was too painful to acknowledge. I remembered last month's visit to their apartment. I had brought a homemade casserole, the same recipe Margaret used to make that Savannah claimed to love as a child. Stephen had taken one bite and made a face like he was eating expired food. "Wow, James, this tastes exactly like nursing home cuisine. Is this what they serve at those senior centers you've been talking about visiting?" Savannah had laughed at his joke, actually laughed, while I forced myself to chuckle along and make some self-deprecating comment about my cooking skills deteriorating with age. At the time, I had told myself it was harmless teasing between family members. Now I understood it was deliberate cruelty designed to make me feel small and ridiculous. I thought about the previous Christmas, when I had given them each gift cards worth $500 to their favorite stores. Stephen had barely looked up from his phone while unwrapping his present, and Savannah had hugged me with the mechanical efficiency of someone performing an unpleasant obligation. Neither of them had sent thank you notes or even mentioned the gifts in subsequent conversations. I had attributed their lack of enthusiasm to adult sophistication, telling myself that practical gifts were more valuable than emotional gestures. The truth was that they saw my generosity as their rightful due, not as expressions of love worthy of gratitude or acknowledgement. I remembered countless dinner conversations where I would share stories from my accounting career or updates about my doctor appointments, only to notice Stephen checking his phone constantly while Savannah stared over my shoulder at their television. Their body language screamed boredom and impatience, but I had interpreted their distraction as the natural result of generational differences in busy lives. Now I realized they genuinely found my company unbearable. Every story I told, every health update I shared, every attempt at normal family conversation was perceived as an imposition by people who saw me as an obligation, rather than a human being they cared about. The most devastating revelation was understanding how long this had been going on. The voice message suggested that their contempt for me was well established and frequently discussed. This was not a recent development triggered by temporary stress or financial pressure. They had been tolerating me for months, possibly years, while privately discussing how much they disliked spending time with me. I thought about my weekly visits to their apartment, how I would always bring groceries or small gifts, how I would stay for exactly 2 hours before announcing my departure to avoid overstaying my welcome. I had been so careful not to impose on their time or space, so grateful for any attention they showed me, so eager to prove that I was a helpful rather than burdensome presence in their lives. Instead, every visit had been an ordeal they endured in exchange for continued financial support. Every smile had been fake, every conversation had been performed, every expression of affection had been calculated to maintain their access to my retirement savings. I had spent 2 years believing I was building a closer relationship with my daughter and son-in-law, when in reality I had been paying them to tolerate my presence in their lives. I had been so desperate to maintain family connections after Margaret's death that I had willingly transformed myself into a source of income rather than demanding to be treated as a human being worthy of genuine respect and affection. The phone rang at 11:30 that morning, interrupting my painful inventory of past humiliations. Savannah's name appeared on the caller ID, and I stared at the screen for several rings before answering. Her voice sounded artificially bright and caring, the same tone she had been using for months that I now recognized as completely fraudulent. "Hi, Daddy. How are you feeling today?" "Did you remember to take your blood pressure medication this morning?" Every word felt like a small knife cutting into my chest. The fake concern, the patronizing tone, the assumption that I needed reminding to take medications I had been managing independently for years. Yesterday, this conversation would have made me feel loved and cared for. Today, I heard it as the performance it had always been. "I am fine, sweetheart," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the turmoil churning in my stomach. "That is wonderful to hear. Listen, I hate to bother you about this, but our rent is due today and Steven's paycheck got delayed again by his company's accounting department. Could you possibly help us out just this once? We will definitely pay you back as soon as his next check comes through and we get caught up on everything." The same lie she had been telling for 24 months. Steven's paychecks were always delayed, his accounting department was always incompetent, their financial stability was always just one paycheck away, and I was always expected to bridge the gap without question or complaint, like a reliable ATM machine that dispensed money on demand. "Of course," I heard myself saying, my voice remaining calm and accommodating. "I will transfer the money this afternoon. You are absolutely the best father in the world, Dad. Steven and I feel so lucky to have you in our lives. We love you so much and appreciate everything you do for us." Murr. The words that used to fill me with warmth and purpose now sounded like dialogue from a badly written play. Every expression of love and gratitude was revealed as manipulation. Every compliment was exposed as a tool designed to keep me writing checks without asking difficult questions. After hanging up, I sat in my recliner for a long time, staring at the family photograph on my side table. The picture showed Savannah, Steven, and me at last year's Christmas dinner, all of us smiling broadly at the camera. I remembered feeling so proud that evening, so grateful to have family members who valued my company and welcomed me into their home for holidays and special occasions. Now, the photograph looked like evidence of my own pathetic delusions. The smiles were fake. The warmth was performed. The family unity was purchased with my retirement savings. I had been so desperate to believe in our relationship that I had ignored every sign pointing to its artificial nature. But here was something they did not know about this worthless old burden who smelled like medicine. I had spent 43 years managing a small accounting firm, dealing with difficult clients, making tough financial decisions, and recognizing when people were trying to manipulate me for their own benefit. I knew how to read people, how to plan ahead, how to be patient, and how to protect myself from those who saw me as nothing more than a source of easy money. And I was about to remind them that underestimating someone could be a very expensive mistake. 3 days passed before I made my first move. 3 days of careful consideration, of weighing my options, of planning exactly how to handle this situation with the precision I had once applied to managing client accounts. I did not act out of anger or hurt feelings. I acted out of clarity. When their rent payment came due on the 15th of the month, I simply did nothing. No transfer, no phone call, no explanation. I sat at my kitchen table, drinking my morning coffee, and watched the clock tick past 9 in the morning without moving a single dollar from my account to theirs. For the first time in 24 months, Savannah and Steven would have to figure out their own financial obligations without my automatic assistance. The silence felt powerful. For 2 years, I had been so eager to help, so quick to respond to their needs, so afraid of disappointing them that I had never given them reason to worry about my reliability. They had grown accustomed to my money appearing in their account like clockwork, without delay or conditions. They had never had to wonder if I might say no or ask questions, or simply forget to help them. Today they would learn what uncertainty felt like. My phone rang at 11:15. Savannah's name appeared on the screen, and I let it ring 4 times before answering, something I had never done before. When I picked up, her voice carried the first note of genuine concern I had heard from her in months. "Hi, Dad. I was just checking to see if you had any trouble with the bank transfer today. Sometimes those online systems can be really confusing, and I know technology is not always your strong suit." The condescension in her voice was remarkable. She was already creating excuses for me, assuming that any delay must be due to my incompetence with modern banking rather than a deliberate choice on my part. Even when asking for help, she could not resist treating me like a confused elderly person who needed guidance with basic tasks. "Oh," I said, injecting just the right amount of vague confusion into my voice. "Was I supposed to transfer money today? I must have forgotten to write it down in my calendar." A pause. I could practically hear her mental wheels spinning as she processed this unexpected development. In 2 years, I had never forgotten a payment, never needed reminders, never failed to anticipate their needs before they had to ask. "The rent, Dad. Our rent was due today, remember? We talked about it on Tuesday when I called you about Stephen's delayed paycheck." "Oh yes, of course. I am sorry, sweetheart. I have been feeling a little scattered lately. Let me take care of that right away. Are you feeling okay? You sound different. Maybe you should make an appointment with your doctor to check if your medications need adjusting." The speed with which she jumped to concerns about my mental competence was telling. Rather than considering that I might have other priorities or reasons for the delay, her immediate assumption was that something must be wrong with my brain. This was how little she thought of my intelligence and autonomy. "I feel fine," I assured her. "Just busy with some other things. I will get that transfer done this afternoon." "This afternoon? Dad, the rent was due this morning. Could you possibly do it right now while we are on the phone? I can walk you through the steps if you are having trouble with the bank website." The panic was starting to creep into her voice. The idea of waiting several more hours for my money was apparently intolerable. I wondered what Stephen was saying in the background. What kind of pressure she was feeling from her husband, who could barely stand to be in the same room as me. "I'm not near my computer right now," I lied smoothly. "But I promise I will take care of it before 5 o'clock today." After hanging up, I felt something I had not experienced in years, a sense of control over my own life. For the first time since Margaret's death, I was making decisions based on my own needs and priorities, rather than desperately trying to please people who saw me as a burden. I did not transfer the money at 5 o'clock, or at 6 o'clock, or at any point that day. Savannah called again at 7:30 that evening, and this time her voice carried a sharp edge of anxiety that she was trying unsuccessfully to hide behind false cheerfulness. "Hi, Dad. I just wanted to check in and see how your day went. Did you manage to get to the bank?" "Oh, I had such a busy day," I replied, maintaining my confused elderly person act. "I went to the grocery store this morning, then I had lunch with my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, and then I took a nap this afternoon. Time just seemed to slip away from me." "Dad, you said you would transfer the rent money before 5 o'clock today." "Our landlord is going to charge us a late fee if the payment does not come through tonight." For the first time in our conversation, she had dropped the pretense of concern for my well-being and moved straight to the real issue, their money. No more questions about my health or offers to help me navigate technology. Just direct pressure to produce the funds they needed. "Oh my goodness, I completely forgot about that," I said, allowing genuine surprise to color my voice. "I am so sorry, sweetheart. Tomorrow has been such a blur lately. Should I take care of it right now, or would first thing tomorrow morning be acceptable?" The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. I could imagine her gripping the phone, trying to figure out how to respond to this unprecedented situation. Her reliable father, her dependable source of emergency funds, was suddenly acting like an unreliable old man who could not keep track of basic commitments. "Tonight would be much better, Dad. Stephen is really stressed about the late fee, and you know how hard he has been working to find steady employment. Could you please just log into your bank account and send the transfer right now while I wait on the phone?" The desperation was becoming obvious now. Her voice had lost all traces of the patronizing sweetness she usually used with me. This was panic, pure and simple. They had no backup plan, no savings to cover their rent, no way to manage their basic living expenses without my money. Of course, honey, I said. Let me go find my reading glasses and boot up the computer. This might take a few minutes since I am not as quick with these things as you young people are. I put the phone down and made myself a cup of tea. When I returned 15 minutes later, Savannah was still waiting on the line, though I could hear tense conversation happening in the background. Stephen's voice was raised, though I could not make out his exact words. Sorry that took so long, I said. I could not remember where I left my reading glasses, and then the computer was being very slow to start up. Did you manage to send the transfer? Well, I logged into the bank website, but then I got confused about which account to send the money from. I have my checking account and my savings account, and I was not sure which one had enough money to cover the full amount. Maybe I should wait until tomorrow morning when I can call the bank and ask them to help me figure it out. The sound that came from Savannah's end of the phone was somewhere between a gasp and a groan. I could hear Stephen's voice getting louder in the background, though his words were still indistinct. Dad, please, I really need you to try one more time tonight. Stephen and I cannot afford the late fee on top of everything else we are dealing with right now. I understand, sweetheart, but I just do not want to make a mistake and accidentally transfer money from the wrong account or send the wrong amount. You know how these computer systems can be. Maybe tomorrow when my mind is clearer. Fine, she interrupted, her composure finally cracking completely. Just please take care of it first thing tomorrow morning. Can you promise me that? Of course, I said. I will make it my top priority. But I had no intention of making it my priority, or anyone else's priority, ever again. The next morning, I did not transfer their rent money. I went for a walk instead, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the feeling of freedom that came with having my own schedule and my own priorities for the first time in 2 years. My phone started ringing at 9:30. By the third day of delayed payments, their desperation had reached a level that was almost entertaining to observe. My phone rang constantly now, sometimes 4 or 5 times per day, with increasingly frantic messages from Savannah and, for the first time in our relationship, direct calls from Stephen himself. Stephen, who had previously considered me too boring and worthless to deserve his attention, was suddenly very interested in having conversations with me. His first call came on Thursday morning at 8:15, waking me from a peaceful sleep. James, hey, it's Stephen. Listen, I wanted to check in with you personally because Savannah mentioned you might be having some trouble with your banking situation, and I know how frustrating technology can be for people your age. The condescension was breathtaking. Here was the man who had called me a worthless burden that smells like medicine, now speaking to me with the exaggerated patience usually reserved for small children or people with severe cognitive impairments. He was trying to sound helpful and concerned, but I could hear the barely controlled panic underneath his performance. Oh, hello, Stephen, I replied, injecting confusion and gratitude into my voice. How thoughtful of you to call. I have been having some trouble keeping track of things lately. Right, exactly. That is completely normal for someone in your situation. The important thing is not to worry about it too much. Maybe we could meet up this afternoon and I could help you work through the bank transfer process step by step. I am pretty good with computers and online banking. This was remarkable. Stephen, who had never voluntarily spent time with me, who had made jokes about my cooking and my age, who had told my daughter that he could barely stand to be in the same room as me, was now offering to drive to my apartment and personally assist me with financial transactions. That is very generous of you, I said. But I would not want to impose on your time, especially when you are working so hard to find steady employment. A slight pause. I had hit a nerve by mentioning his unemployment, a topic that apparently remained sensitive despite his big talk about my dependence on him. It is no imposition at all, James. Family helps family, right? Besides, I know how important it is for you to feel useful and involved in supporting Savannah and me. I would hate for you to feel bad about a simple technical difficulty getting in the way of that. The manipulation was so obvious, it was almost insulting. He was trying to frame his desperation for my money as concern for my emotional well-being, suggesting that I would feel bad if I could not continue subsidizing their lifestyle. The subtext was clear. Paying their bills was my primary source of self-worth, and he was graciously offering to help me maintain that purpose in life. You are probably right, I agreed. I do feel terrible when I cannot help you and Savannah with your expenses. It makes me feel like a useless old man. You are definitely not useless, James. You are a very important part of our family, and we really value everything you do for us. Why do not I come over around 2 o'clock this afternoon and we can get this whole banking situation sorted out together? After hanging up, I realized that Stephen's call represented a complete shift in their strategy. For 2 years, he had maintained the pretense that he barely tolerated my existence, leaving all financial requests and family interactions to Savannah while he remained aloof and dismissive. Now, faced with the prospect of actually having to pay their own bills, he was suddenly willing to spend an entire afternoon pretending to enjoy my company. I wondered what conversations were happening between them behind closed doors. How many arguments had they had about my sudden unreliability? How much blame was Stephen placing on Savannah for failing to maintain better control over her father's financial contributions? How desperate were they becoming as their bills accumulated and their options dwindled? At 2 o'clock sharp, Stephen knocked on my apartment door. When I opened it, he was holding a small bouquet of grocery store flowers and wearing the brightest smile I had ever seen on his face. The transformation was so dramatic, it was almost comical. "James, you look great today. I brought these flowers because I know how much you appreciate thoughtful gestures, and I wanted to show you how much Savannah and I care about you." He stepped into my apartment and immediately began commenting on various objects and decorations with enthusiastic interest, as if he had never noticed them during his previous visits. He praised a painting that he had once described as depressing, complimented my furniture arrangement that he had previously called outdated, and asked detailed questions about my medication routine that he had formerly mocked. "I have been thinking lately about how lucky Savannah and I are to have you in our lives," he continued while settling onto my couch. "You bring so much wisdom and stability to our family. I feel like I have not been appreciative enough of everything you do for us." I sat across from him, observing this performance with fascination. Every word was calculated. Every gesture was designed to rebuild a relationship that he had never valued in the first place. He was trying to manufacture affection and respect in the span of a single afternoon, undoing 2 years of contempt and disregard with desperate charm. "That is very kind of you to say," I replied. "I sometimes worry that I am becoming a burden in my old age." "A burden? James, that is crazy talk. You are the opposite of a burden. You are a blessing. Savannah and I were just talking last night about how grateful we are for your support and guidance." The lies came so easily to him that I found myself almost impressed by his shamelessness. This was the same man who had described me as a worthless burden just 4 days earlier, now claiming that he and Savannah regularly discussed their gratitude for my presence in their lives. "Now," he continued, "why do not we tackle this banking situation together? I know technology can be overwhelming, but I am here to help you through every step of the process." I led him to my computer desk and deliberately fumbled with the mouse and keyboard, playing up my confusion while he guided me through logging into my bank account. When we reached the transfer screen, I squinted at the monitor and shook my head. "I am sorry, Stephen, but these numbers are so small and everything looks so complicated. Are you sure I will not accidentally send money to the wrong place or transfer the wrong amount?" "Do not worry about that at all," he assured me, his voice tight with barely controlled urgency. "I will double-check everything before you hit the submit button. We just need to transfer $1,400 to Savannah's checking account for the rent, and then maybe $800 for the credit card payment if you can manage it." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned to him with a confused expression. "Stephen, I hate to ask this, but could you remind me why I am sending this money? Is this for a special occasion or emergency of some kind?" The question clearly caught him off guard. His mouth opened and closed a few times before he managed to respond. "It is for the regular monthly expenses, James. The rent and credit card payment that you help us with every month. You know, the arrangement we have had for the past couple of years." "Oh, of course," I said, nodding as if the memory was slowly returning. "I am sorry. Sometimes I get confused about these things. There are so many different bills and payments to keep track of." "Exactly, which is why it is great that I am here to help you remember and organize everything. Should we go ahead and process the transfer now?" I looked at the computer screen again, then back at Stephen, whose smile was becoming increasingly strained. "You know what? I think I should probably call my bank tomorrow morning and speak with a representative about this. I want to make sure I understand exactly what I am doing before I transfer such a large amount of money." Stephen's face went pale. "James, the rent was due 3 days ago. We really cannot wait any longer for this payment. Oh dear, I said, genuine concern creeping into my voice. I had no idea the situation was so urgent. Why did you not mention that sooner? I did mention it. Savannah has been calling you every day about this. Has she? I do not remember those conversations very clearly. Maybe I should start writing things down so I do not forget important details like this. I could see the realization dawning in Stephen's eyes. The possibility that I was not just confused or forgetful, but that something more fundamental had changed about my willingness to automatically solve their financial problems. The possibility that their reliable income source was becoming unreliable through circumstances beyond their control. James, he said slowly, is everything okay with your health? Have you been feeling confused or forgetful lately? I feel fine, I assured him. Just a little overwhelmed by all these financial responsibilities. Maybe I should talk to my doctor about whether managing so many different payments is too much stress for someone my age. The look of pure panic that crossed his face was worth 2 years of humiliation and disrespect. 2 weeks had passed since Stephen's unsuccessful visit to my apartment, and their situation had deteriorated to the point where subtlety was no longer possible. The gentle manipulation and fake concern had been replaced by increasingly desperate phone calls and unexpected visits. They were no longer trying to maintain the illusion that they cared about my well-being. They just wanted their money. On a Tuesday evening, as I was enjoying a quiet dinner of leftover pot roast, both Savannah and Stephen appeared at my door without warning. Through the peephole, I could see the tension in their faces, the way they stood close together like soldiers preparing for battle. This was not going to be a social visit. I opened the door and greeted them with the same confused smile I had been perfecting for the past 2 weeks. What a wonderful surprise. I was not expecting company tonight. Savannah pushed past me into the apartment, her usual pretense of politeness completely abandoned. Stephen followed close behind, his face grim with determination. They both sat down on my couch without being invited, creating an atmosphere of confrontation that filled my small living room. "Dad, we need to have a serious conversation," Savannah announced, her voice carrying an edge I had not heard since she was a teenager arguing about curfew. "Stephen and I are very concerned about your recent behavior." I settled into my recliner, maintaining my expression of innocent confusion. "My behavior? Have I done something wrong?" "You have not paid any of our bills for 2 weeks, Stephen said bluntly, abandoning any attempt at diplomacy. "Our rent is 14 days overdue, our credit card payment bounced, and our car insurance got canceled yesterday. We need to know what is going on with you." The directness was almost refreshing after weeks of manipulation and false concern. Finally, they were admitting what this relationship had always been about, my money and their bills. No more pretending to care about my health or happiness, no more fake gratitude or manufactured affection. "I am sorry," I said, allowing confusion to creep into my voice. "I have been feeling so scattered lately. Sometimes I forget what day it is, or whether I have already taken care of something. Maybe I should start keeping better notes about my responsibilities." Savannah leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Dad, you managed your own accounting business for over 40 years. You never forgot important dates or financial obligations in your entire life. This sudden confusion does not make sense." She was sharper than I had given her credit for. Despite her willingness to exploit my generosity, she had inherited enough of my analytical nature to recognize when something did not add up. The question was whether she would push hard enough to uncover the truth, or whether she would accept whatever explanation kept the money flowing. "People change as they get older, sweetheart," I replied gently. "Maybe my mind is not as sharp as it used to be. Perhaps I should see a doctor about medication adjustments or memory supplements." "Or perhaps," Stephen interjected, his voice heavy with frustration, "you are upset about something and taking it out on us by withholding financial support. If we have done something to offend you, just tell us what it is so we can fix it and move on." This was interesting. Stephen was smart enough to consider that my behavior might be deliberate, but not quite smart enough to figure out what had triggered it. He was treating this like a negotiation where the right combination of words would restore their access to my bank account. "Upset?" I repeated, as if the concept was foreign to me. "Why would I be upset with you? You are my family. Family members do not deliberately hurt each other." The irony of that statement hung in the air between us. Both Savannah and Stephen shifted uncomfortably, perhaps remembering conversations they had assumed I would never hear. That is exactly right, Savannah said quickly. Family members support each other, which is why we are so confused about why you have stopped helping us with our expenses. Dad, we really need that money. Our landlord is threatening to start eviction proceedings if we do not catch up on the rent by Friday. Eviction? I said, genuine alarm coloring my voice. That sounds very serious. How did things get so bad so quickly? They got bad because you stopped paying our bills without any explanation. Stephen snapped, his patience finally exhausted. For 2 years you have been reliable and consistent, and now suddenly you are acting like you do not remember our arrangement. Either you are having serious cognitive problems, or you are playing games with us. The mask was slipping completely now. Stephen's contempt for me was bleeding through his desperation, revealing the man who had called me a worthless burden in that accidental voice message. But he had made a crucial error by presenting me with an ultimatum. Either I was becoming senile, or I was deliberately manipulating them. It was time to show them exactly which option was correct. I reached into the side table drawer next to my recliner and pulled out my phone. With deliberate slowness, I navigated to my voice messages and found the recording that had started this entire transformation. Savannah and Stephen watched with growing confusion as I held up the phone between us. Before we continue this conversation, I said, my voice dropping its confused undertone for the first time in 2 weeks, I think you should hear something that was accidentally sent to me a few weeks ago. I pressed play, and Stephen's voice filled my apartment with the same clarity and cruelty that had shattered my illusions weeks earlier. I swear to God, Savannah, your dad is becoming such a worthless burden that smells like medicine. Savannah's face went white as the recording continued. Stephen looked like he was going to be sick. Both of them sat frozen on my couch as their private conversation played out in its entirety. Every cruel word and dismissive laugh echoing through the room they had violated with their presence. When the message ended, the silence was deafening. I set my phone down on the side table and looked at them both with the same calm expression I had maintained throughout our conversation. So, I said quietly, to answer your question, Stephen, I am not having cognitive problems. I remember everything perfectly clearly, including exactly what you think of me. Savannah found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Dad. That was taken out of context. We were just frustrated about money, and Stephen said things he did not mean. Really? I replied, because it sounded like a very detailed and specific assessment of my character. A worthless burden that smells like medicine. Someone you can barely stand to be in the same room with. Someone whose only value is writing checks to cover your expenses. Stephen finally spoke up, his voice shaking with panic. James, I am so sorry. I was having a bad day, and I took my frustrations out by saying terrible things about you. It does not reflect how I really feel. How you really feel? I stood up from my recliner, and for the first time in this conversation, I allowed my anger to show through my calm facade. Stephen, that recording lasted over 2 minutes. Those were not words spoken in a moment of frustration. That was a detailed conversation about how much you both despise having me in your lives. Savannah started crying, though I suspected the tears were more about losing their financial support than genuine remorse for their cruelty. We do not despise you, Dad. We love you. We were just stressed about money and said things we should not have said. You love my money, I corrected her. You love the fact that I pay your rent and your credit card bills and your insurance premiums. But you have never loved me. That recording made it very clear that you see me as nothing more than an inconvenience you tolerate in exchange for financial support. The truth was finally out in the open, and none of us could pretend otherwise anymore. They sat on my couch looking like children caught in a lie, while I stood over them feeling more clear-headed than I had in years. So here is what is going to happen, I continued, my voice steady and final. I am done paying your bills. I am done pretending that we have a loving family relationship, and I am done allowing you to treat me like a worthless burden who should be grateful for the privilege of subsidizing your lifestyle. Stephen jumped up from the couch, desperation making him aggressive. You cannot just cut us off like this. We have been depending on your help for 2 years. We have bills, responsibilities, commitments that we made based on your support. You made commitments based on my support, I repeated slowly, while privately discussing how much you despise my company. That was your choice, Stephen. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. As I watched them leave my apartment that night, both of them crying and pleading for one more chance, I felt something I had not experienced since Margaret died. I felt free. 6 months later, I was sitting on the small balcony of my new apartment, watching the sunrise over the city while sipping coffee that tasted better than any I had made in years. The apartment was smaller than my previous place, but it was entirely mine. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every decision about how to spend my time and money belonged to me alone. The transition had not been immediate. For the first few weeks after confronting Savannah and Stephen, I had waited for them to call, to apologize, to attempt some kind of reconciliation, but the silence stretched on, and eventually I realized that they had never really wanted a relationship with me at all. They had wanted my money, and without it, I held no value for them whatsoever. The realization should have been devastating, but instead it felt like stepping out of a prison I had built around myself. For 2 years, I had been so desperate to maintain family connections that I had allowed myself to be treated as less than human. I had paid for the privilege of being mocked, ignored, and dismissed by people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient source of income. Now, for the first time since Margaret's death, I was living for myself. I had used the money I had been spending on their bills to downsize to a comfortable one-bedroom apartment in a building full of active seniors. My new neighbors were people who chose to spend time with me because they enjoyed my company, not because I paid their expenses. We played cards on Tuesday evenings, took walking tours of local museums on weekends, and shared potluck dinners where everyone contributed something meaningful to the conversation. Mrs. Chen from down the hall had become a particularly close friend. She was a retired librarian with a sharp wit and an impressive collection of mystery novels that she shared with me freely. When I told her about my situation with Savannah and Stephen, she had listened without judgment and then said something that stuck with me. Family is not about blood, James. It is about people who value you for who you are, not what you can give them. I had started taking photography classes at the community center, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for during my working years. My instructor was a patient woman in her 70s who praised my eye for composition and encouraged me to enter my photos in local art shows. Last month, one of my landscape photographs had won 3rd place in a regional contest, and the small ribbon now hung on my refrigerator next to a picture of Mrs. Chen and me at the museum. The financial impact of cutting off Savannah and Stephen had been entirely positive. Without their monthly expenses draining my retirement account, I had been able to increase my own quality of life significantly. I could afford better groceries, occasional restaurant meals, small trips to visit places I had always wanted to see. My money was finally being spent on someone who appreciated it. Me. I had heard through Mrs. Patterson, my former neighbor, that Savannah and Stephen had lost their apartment and moved in with Stephen's parents in a different state. Apparently, their financial situation had collapsed completely without my support, and they had been forced to make drastic changes to their lifestyle. Mrs. Patterson had seemed to expect me to feel guilty about their circumstances, but I felt nothing except a mild satisfaction that they were finally experiencing the consequences of their choices. They had treated me like a worthless burden, and now they were learning what life was like without that burden's financial contributions. My phone rarely rang anymore, which had initially felt lonely, but now seemed peaceful. No more desperate calls about overdue bills. No more fake expressions of gratitude designed to keep money flowing. No more conversations where I felt like an inconvenience being tolerated by people who resented my existence. The silence was golden. On a Thursday afternoon in early spring, as I was returning from a photography walk in the nearby park, I found Savannah standing outside my apartment building. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Her clothes were clean but clearly secondhand, and she carried herself with the defeated posture of someone whose plans had not worked out. "Hello, Dad," she said quietly when she saw me approaching. "Could we talk for a few minutes?" I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation and false emotion that had characterized our previous interactions. Instead, I saw something that looked like genuine humility, though I had learned not to trust my initial impressions when it came to my daughter. "What did you want to talk about?" I asked, making no move to invite her inside. "I wanted to apologize," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for everything, for the way Stephen and I treated you, for taking advantage of your generosity, for saying horrible things about you behind your back. We were wrong, and I am sorry. I am." The apology sounded sincere, but I had heard sincere-sounding words from her before that had turned out to be carefully crafted performances designed to achieve specific outcomes. I waited for her to continue, curious about what she was really after. "I know you probably do not want to have anything to do with me anymore," she continued. "But I wanted you to know that Stephen and I are not together anymore. Living with his parents made us both realize that our relationship was built on very shallow foundations. Without your money to cushion our problems, we fell apart pretty quickly." This information was mildly interesting but not particularly surprising. A relationship based on shared entitlement and mutual contempt for their benefactor was unlikely to survive once that benefactor was removed from the equation. "I am sorry to hear that," I said, though I was not sure if I meant it. "I also wanted you to know that I have a job now. It does not pay very much, but it is honest work, and I am learning to manage my own finances instead of depending on other people to solve my problems. I am sharing a small apartment with 2 roommates, and it is not glamorous, but it is mine." She paused, looking at me with an expression I could not quite read. "I am not asking for money, Dad. I know I do not deserve your help anymore. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how badly we treated you, and I will regret it for the rest of my life." I believed that she regretted it. What I was less certain about was whether she regretted the cruelty itself or simply the consequences of being caught. "I appreciate you telling me that," I said carefully. "It takes courage to admit when you have made mistakes." "Could we possibly have coffee sometime?" she asked, hope creeping into her voice. "I understand if you do not want to see me again, but I would like the chance to rebuild some kind of relationship with you, if that is possible. Not a financial relationship," she added quickly. "Just a real one, where we actually care about each other instead of what we can get from each other." I looked at my daughter, this woman who had once been a little girl I had loved more than my own life, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition that people could change, that lessons could be learned, that redemption was sometimes possible for those willing to earn it. "Maybe," I said finally, "but it would have to be very different from before. I am not the same person I was 6 months ago, Savannah. I have learned what my own company is worth, and I will not accept being treated as less than that ever again." "I understand," she said, tears starting to form in her eyes. I would not expect anything else. As I watched her walk away that afternoon, I realized that I was genuinely curious about whether she had learned from her mistakes, whether the person she was becoming could be someone I might want to know. But I was no longer desperate for her approval or affection. I had built a life that fulfilled me without requiring her participation. If she wanted to be part of it, she would have to earn that privilege through consistent, genuine respect for the person I had become. And if she chose not to make that effort, I would continue to be perfectly happy with the friends and activities and independence I had discovered in her absence. For the first time in my adult life, I was enough for myself. Everything else was just a bonus. That evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I raised my coffee cup in a small toast to the man I had become. A man who knew his own worth, who demanded respect, who chose his relationships based on mutual affection rather than financial obligation. A man who was no longer anyone's burden, but finally, blessedly, free.